Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual conversation on Australia-US space cooperation. I am David Gaynor, the U.S. Consul General here in Perth. I'm really delighted to be hosting this conversation this morning with our two outstanding speakers and welcoming people not just from WA, but from all around the globe tuning in to this conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, upon whose spiritual homeland we are meeting, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Would also like to acknowledge our two excellent speakers today, Russell Potapinski and Rene Sayers. Russ and Rene are two of Perth's most passionate advocates and science collaboration. Thank you both for taking the with us today. We're really looking forward to a great discussion. Before we begin, a few housekeeping tips. Please try and keep your microphones on mute during Russ and Renee's presentation, and we love to get as many questions as possible. If you'd like to ask questions directly to our speakers, you can use the Raise My Hand feature in WebEx, and I'll eventually call on you once we get to the Q&A session. If you want to actually just use the chat feature as well and put in your questions, that's great. We also encourage postings on social media, as well as use of the hashtag US with. We'll hear from our speakers about 10 minutes each. After that, we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A before ending at 12 noon. Science and technology cooperation is really an important part of the broader U.S.-Australia bilateral relationship. Both of our countries view science, discovery, and innovation as essential to our futures for solving global challenges and for safety and security. It's no surprise then that the United States and Australia have worked together for more than a half a century in the space sector. NASA is CSIRO's largest international partner, which began in the 1960s with the lunar missions and continues today with missions to Mars and Pluto. In fact, NASA scientists visited the Pilbara here in WA just last year, researching ancient rock formations as part of the Mars 2020 mission. And the Australian government, through the Australian Space Agency last September, committed to joining the US in its mission to return to the moon by 2024. Contributions could be in robotics, automation, and remote asset management. So it is very exciting to have Russ and Rene with us here today to talk about the new Australian Remote Operations for Space and Earth Consortium, or AROSE, and U.S.-Australian space cooperation more broadly. Let me briefly now introduce the speakers. Russ and Rene, I've tried to keep your introductions short, so please feel free to add any more additional information during your presentations. First, Russ Potapinski is the co-founder and chair of AROSE and is speaking today in that capacity. Russell is also the general manager and head of intelligent and autonomous systems at Woodside Energy. In this role, he leads research, development, and implementation of advanced technologies such as IBM Watson, Amazon Web Service, and autonomous robotics in collaboration with NASA. Russ also serves as the chair of the Western Australian Defence Sciences Centre, is a member of the Australian Space Agency's Leaders Forum, and serves on SciTech's advisory board. Russ originally hails from Canada, now resides here in Perth. Rene Sayers is also a founding member of AROSE and serves on the AROSE steering committee, where she guides key communication plans and the formation of the brand. Rene is research ambassador for Curtin University Space Science and Technology Center, where she leads engagement strategies, policy advocacy, and international relations. Her work includes NASA's Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute, or SSERVI, and other exciting projects that we'll hear more about today. Rene is also a Young Leaders Delegate at the Australian American Leadership Dialogue, and she's been selected to participate later this year in the State Department's prestigious International Visitor Leadership Program on advancing women in STEM. I could say a lot more about these two outstanding individuals, but I want to turn it over to them because that's why you're tuning in. So, Russ, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I will describe a little bit about what the Australian Remote Operations for Space and Earth is in a few minutes. But the origin of AROSE is one that is deeply linked to the cooperation between Australia and the United States. Back in 2015, and my role as Woodside, we were advancing artificial intelligence in conjunction with the IBM Research Labs in Austin, Texas. And one of the AI systems that we created back then, we found that was also able to control robotic systems just by actually having somebody walk through and talk with them a particular task. We shot a demo video of that. IBM asked if they could share that with some of their deep research collaboration partners. And of course, Woodside agreed to that. 2 weeks later, NASA reached out to us, myself in particular, and said they were also very interested in the collision between AI and robotics, and could we come to Johnson Space Center and see if we had anything to collaborate on. That led to a 5-year International Space Act agreement for really controlling robotics autonomously, so that they can do tasks either on the International Space Station or potentially in remote environments here in Australia as well. When the Australian Space Agency was formed a little over 2 years ago, they actually announced the space agency in front of one of the NASA Robonauts that are here in the labs in Perth, Western Australia. An exciting time for Australia to actually have the Australian Space Agency formed. And as such, they had a series of workshops, whereas what should the Australian Space Agency focus on? What can Australia contribute to the Artemis program and the endeavors that we have, both scientific and industrial, in space? It was at this one where I met my co-founder, Pam Melroy. For those of you familiar with the space sector, you'll certainly have heard of Pam. She is an astronaut, shuttle commander, a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, test pilot, executive at DARPA, and a variety of other things. If you've met her, she oozes so much of the right stuff, it can be a little overwhelming. What we really came up with at these workshops that were being held by the space agency was Australia has a lot to give to the international spacefaring community when it comes to remote operations. The tyranny of distance here that we have in Australia has actually led to advances in the technologies and the systems integration that allows either an offshore gas platform worth billions of dollars to have nobody on board for it to function, or some of the amazing autonomous mine sites that we have here where you have drilling rigs, trucks, crushers, trains that are 2 kilometers long, some of the giant, largest robots in the world, operate and earn a living for themselves here in Western Australia and across the nation as well. So remote operations and that systems integration approach was something that we thought that the Australian contribution to the international spacefaring community would be an excellent suggestion. Dr. Megan Clark, head of the space agency, agreed with that and then asked sort of Pam and myself to, okay, what can we have in terms of an industry-led consortium that can contribute to this? That kicked off a series of workshops across our nation. The first one was actually in Brisbane in Lockheed Martin's offices. And then it grew to a series of workshops in all of the different capital cities. Over 50 organizations contributed, many of them American-based companies, but not just private industries, also chief scientists from the various states, state and federal governments, as well as our fine representation by our academic community here in Australia as well. So, it's almost a bit of an out there vision. Could companies like, the mining sectors, the energy sectors, the defense, agriculture, the academic institutions, state governments, federal governments, could we all come together and collaborate around these technologies so that we can actually operate any facility from anywhere on and off of Earth? It was a bit of a stretch of a dream, but I think we have achieved just that. And we've got a little bit of a video here to show just what this could actually mean for Australia and the international community. showing that video. So it's a little bit of an overview of what AROSE hopes to accomplish. We are a not-for-profit organization. Out of the 50-some members that actually contributed to the visioning of AROSE, a smaller group of us have gotten together to actually launch the organization, and within the next couple of weeks we will be ready to accept member organizations more broadly. We did have to do some governance stuff first. Really, the remote operations, I think, is going to fundamentally change how we work. If you are actually wanting to explore the lunar surface, but unfortunately missed out as a spot in the astronaut program, being able to be virtually there, direct science experiments from Earth, I think will be absolutely critical. And then here on Earth, many lucrative positions and jobs that will just simply open up. If you are actually, let's say, a single parent returning from parental leave, and you would actually wish to actually operate large oil and gas facilities or offshore or any other asset in remote areas, you might not be able to just logistically do that with your family. But of course, with these technologies, now you can. Perhaps you were in one of our nation's militaries and sustained an injury while serving. Maybe now you actually need the use of a wheelchair to get along, and you still wish to serve on the front line. Well, today maybe you say that's not possible, but actually with these technologies, it is. And so we don't have to take those careers away from those individuals that may have suffered an injury like that. So I think this will fundamentally change how we work. It'll change actually the jobs and open up a massive amount of job opportunities. If you take a look at WestTrac here in Western Australia, they actually have a remote training facility to train workers on how to use autonomous equipment and maintain them. I particularly like the story. We seconded people to NASA Johnson Space Center, and one of the last people we seconded was to their robotics repair team. So all of the highly technical robots that will be flying in space, these are the teams that repair, upgrade them, and then send them back into orbit. We had one of our staff go there and train up. Thank goodness she's not an American citizen, or they would have poached her. But now she's a robotics and autonomous systems technician, and 2 years ago, her job title was admin assistant. So the opportunities for people to retrain, and we're not talking just the people that want to follow a fine research career like Renae here, but maybe they actually do like to be hands-on. An incredible amount of opportunities now remain that we can benefit. Both sort of individuals that wish to participate in the science of this, but also those individuals that wish to actually do the engineering, construction, and maintenance of these systems that allow the great science to work up. Just to hand over to Renae, we're a projects-based organization, so we are a not-for-profit. The members actually get together, and together we actually can achieve more than each individual organization can in their own. So we've got a couple of projects already up and running. I won't steal Renee's thunder, because the first one is a very science-oriented project. The second one is actually jointly funded from AROSE and the Australian federal government to produce a seminal report, an initial report on the extensive capability that Australia has on this. When the Australian Space Agency goes to visit NASA, one of the first questions is, well, being able to run a lunar habitat or the gateway, which serves as a logistical hub, having automated systems, robotic systems that can actually move the equipment, the science experiments, the food, the water, the fuel, so that the astronauts actually can spend time doing what they should be doing, advancing humanity's knowledge, not necessarily filling racks of equipment. So I'll leave a little bit of that over to Renae. The last one that we've announced, the latest one that we have announced here is AROSE's support for the Robotics Command and Control Facility funding's been announced by the Australian Space Agency right here and again in Western Australia, Robotic Command and Control Facility for space applications. So being able to support that as well. So with that, I'll probably hand over to Renae, and she can talk about the science rather than the industry and the engineering associated with remote operations.
Thanks so much, Russ. And thank you again to you, Consulate General David Gaynor, and all of your team for having us. And a big shout out to our community online as well. It's lovely to see colleagues and friends from here as well as the US. So hello and thank you. one beautiful thing about this, as Russ has shared, is that we're able to sit here side by side, socially distanced, of course, but we love the representation of how industry and science can work together to achieve great things. The Space Science and Technology Centre, where I'm research ambassador, I get the absolute privilege of working with some of the top planetary researchers on the planet. We're represented and have been represented on over a dozen international space missions, including NASA's OSIRIS-REx and InSight, both very amazing and inspirational in the context of the work that they do, the opportunities that they present, and of course the benefits that they bring to the wider communities. And we love being able to see that be injected back here in Australia, and of course here in Western Australia as well. Just really gorgeous with that opening video of AROSE. What's extraordinary about that is that all of that, minus the space animations, courtesy of our friends at NASA, is real footage. Real footage from the field, real footage here in Western Australia and Australia. And what's gorgeous about that is that it's showcasing that we're not starting from scratch. We are pulling together the incredible work that's being done in lots of different sectors and ratifying that to come together for that common goal. We know that as a species, we are a spacefaring species. And what's incredibly exciting with Australia taking this step with our agency, 2 years old, happy birthday. What's really wonderful is that now we're in a position to not only contribute to our own sovereignty as a country, but also what is it that we can contribute on the world stage. And what's really gorgeous is that everything's here ready to go, and what AROSE is doing is that critical component of bringing it all together, ratifying it, not just so all the benefits from all those different sectors are happening here terrestrially, but of course providing that grand unifying vision and endeavour for off-Earth applications. And that's what's tremendously exciting. But how are we going to do that? How are we going to go from all of our incredible terrestrial stuff that we do here that's just business, just another day here in Australia, and that NASA's tapping, Australia, our Australian US friends, going, so what are you actually going to do on this space, in this space adventure? Well, of course, we need to have that step. Our step to space. We need that step to be able to demonstrate how we can take technologies that have fully integrated on the ground, literally here in Australia, how we can take those technologies and show the way forward in space, and how we can contribute to, say, something in the Artemis mission like a lunar gateway and all the incredible remote operations and asset management that you saw in that video. And that's where we come in, which is really exciting at the at Space Science and Technology Centre. Russ indicated a little bit of one of the projects around AROSE, and we are a project-based organisation. We want to get those results happening and bring those benefits as quickly as we can. And one of them is, well, we need a technology solution, a platform in space to be able to do that. Now, we are planetary researchers at SSTC, and one of the amazing things when you build different systems, engineering systems, you're trying to solve big, grand science problems. So one of the things that we focus on, just casually, is the origins and evolution of our solar system. And so some of the things that we do, one of our main projects, our heritage project, is the Desert Fireball Network. And now that is the Global Fireball Observatory as rolled out with our partners with NASA. And while we track and triangulate space rocks as they enter, and we can go and get that rock and connect the rock with an orbit, we are providing a geological context for the solar system. That system actually had some really good benefits for terrestrial industries and some other partners. So when you accidentally are tracking satellites and triangulating them, of course, that's going to have some pretty neat real world industry benefits. And so we've got a long-term relationship with Lockheed Martin, and we've built something called the Fire Opal, which is effectively leveraging the heritage and that technology that's built by planetary researchers years, and is now going to be, a submission for Lockheed Martin into one of the Defence Australia's space situational awareness capabilities because of that. So we've got that heritage of blue sky research, connecting with the engineering and kicking into other industries. So we're demonstrating that virtuous cycle. And similarly, when you're trying to understand solar system origins and evolution, you need a space platform to be able to do that. And one of the neat things is our BNAR space program. We have created a technology that's effectively an all-purpose satellite bus. Sovereign technology, it's radiation hardened, and it's a cost-effective, fail-fast bit of technology that's optimized for industry payloads. So, for example, when we work with our partners to demonstrate different technologies that need to be in that stepping zone from terrestrial to space, as well as, of course, some deep science goals as well with that, ultimately looking at how we can help with NASA's strategic knowledge gaps. So we've got the satellite platform, so a bus that we can integrate different payloads with industry. And so we're providing that stepping stone, the university plugging into industry, being able to connect that virtuous cycle all around. And it's really amazing that we can do that in the context here in Western Australia, here in Australia. As you mentioned, CG Gaynor, we are the Australian lead for planetary science to NASA, to their Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute. And that's just one of a dozen different projects, membership and leadership that we have as well. And it's wonderful because it's right here, right now. We have students being able to come and experience a space career through the research pipeline at the Space Science and Technology Centre. We're showing that our work has relevance in industry as we work and as we're industry facing and embedding with some of the problems that we're trying to solve here terrestrially, as well as preparing our grads and our pipeline together to make Australia a really robust place for space as we leverage all these incredible partnerships as well. So it's definitely understanding the nature of collaboration and what can be done, and looking at how we can learn from our friends in the US and how they've created an incredibly prosperous pipeline through decades of evolution across the way in which they sit with universities, with businesses, with private partnerships, as well as government and defence. And all of that yumminess coming together means that we have a really special opportunity here right now. And that's what's incredibly exciting.
Definitely.
All right, well, thank you so much, Russ and Renee, and it's time for questions. So please, if you are interested in asking a question, you can do it two ways. You can either raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute, or feel free to chat at us and ask your questions in the chat function. So while I'm waiting for questions, I think I will first ask a first question. Russ and Renee, you're extraordinarily passionate about your fields. What got you interested in the first place? And for you, Renee, planetary science, and Russ, automation, robotics.
Thank you for asking. True story. I wrote an email to NASA when I was 16. So I was one of those annoying kids asking why a lot. I was fascinated by space. One of my hobbies was trawling the NASA websites back in the day. And I stumbled across, I loved watching Planetary Nebula as well. So my degree was in astrophysics, but it was that the understanding of asking questions about who we are and our place in the universe that really sparked me. But I used to trawl the NASA websites. I came across the Office of Space Science and Public Outreach, what it was called then. And this little tickle kind of went off in the back of my mind. And I was like, oh, people can talk about space to the public and get other people excited. So for me, that was the sort of birth of, wow, there could be a beautiful middle ground between connecting people with science as well as the way in which science connects with people. So that for me was a beautiful thing. I wrote an email to them and asked what it was, and they were like, yeah, this is outreach and this is science communication. And so from there, I was able to track down a pathway, and that led me to a degree in astrophysics. And then I ran away and joined a science circus at Australian National University, and that was a postgrad in science communication. It's a neat story, CG Gaynor, because of course now I work with NASA, so I can obviously link that nicely back, but I never knew that, 16, 17 years ago, I would be in this position. But yeah, it all started with not being afraid to ask that question and hunting down the pathway. It didn't exist for me at the time. When I turn around, and I'm sure Russ's experience would be the same, you look back and you go, oh, that makes sense. But it didn't exist at the time. So definitely that curiosity and that sense of wonder, and being able to sort of really understand how there's more space in our life and those benefits are brought back. And that was what was really inspiring for me.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit opposite to Renae. I never expected to wander into this field of human endeavor. I have a long career with Woodside, really around commercial. I started as an engineer, but more commercial mergers and acquisitions, and then really profit and loss accountability. But it was about 2014 that my CEO, Peter Coleman, and Chief Technology Officer, Sean Gregory, really started to have a think about the impacts of these advanced technologies on society and our industry as a whole. So this is artificial intelligence, cloud computing, analytics, autonomy, and really came to sort of the conclusion that we are going to have to sort of learn how to surf the wave, or we're going to be dumped by it. These are not technologies that governments or organizations or industry sectors have a choice in. These are coming and coming quickly. Our CTO knew I was a bit of a geek. We knew we didn't have anybody in our company with artificial intelligence experience, but I was asked to relearn and retrain my career into this, and I did so with great gusto. Again, our executives knew I'm a bit of a geek and always have been. But that's the key thing, is being willing to learn at all points in your career, go back to school, relearning skill sets you never actually had. And then, as I said, artificial intelligence led to robotics. That led to a call from NASA. And, it made perfect sense sort of in hindsight that if NASA are trying to develop robots that can walk up and open up an airlock so that they can get the equipment from a visiting spacecraft on the gateway, well, yes, of course, that exact same technology, that exact same autonomy needs to be opening up of valves or pushing buttons and manipulating equipment that was designed by humans for humans. And certainly then that just built on the collaboration where we decided to second people to Johnson Space Center. We sent one of our technicians from the Pilbara over to Johnson Space Center to help repair the on-orbit Robonaut platform. An amazing experience for Pickles when he went over there. So yes, it's been a bit of a weird journey, but I couldn't have asked for a more exciting career than the one I currently have.
Great. Thank you, Russ and Renae. We actually have hands up from Kat, Robinson Hasani. So, Kat, I'm going to unmute you and see if you can actually ask a question. Kat, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Kat Robinson Hasani. I'm a political scientist specializing in space policy and political communication and SciComm. So I'm excited to hear this conversation. I'm in the United States right now, but just waiting for permission to travel from the Australian government to come join my husband there. So I'm just interested in sort of your thoughts on the policy side of this. As a political scientist, I'll be coming there, obviously on the job market, looking for something to do. But yeah, I'm just always interested in with Australia, and especially with the new space agency. I remember in 2017 being there at the IAC, hearing the announcement. So it's been really exciting to watch the progress coming from that. But would be interested in hearing both of your points of view on the policy side, and what things have you seen done well? What are you hoping to see more policy focus on? Things like that. And thank you in advance for answering my question.
Thanks, Kat. Renee,
Yeah,
Russ?
yeah, that's an exciting area, I think, and certainly one that I would suspect needs a lot of work in the coming years. I think the first place I would start is NASA has done an amazing job at building international coalitions. The International Space Station is the iconic example of humanity's sort of collaboration across nations. And they did that through the Cold War, through thick and thin of different differences of opinions between member nations. So, and then taking that to the next step forward with the Artemis program. And yes, there's all of the technologies required, including the technologies that are of interest to AROSE on that. But actually, is equally important are the Artemis Accords. So, what are the rules when we have multiple nations interacting with each other in space? If we go back to the origins of history, we know that, you've got the red lights on the ship on the left, and on the starboard side, you have the green lights. And when you go into a harbor, there's the rules about how you pass each other. I think that whole framework is right for deep thought and being able to construct that so that when we have nations like, and huge shout out to anybody from the UAE that is listening in on this with your very successful launch and your own space exploration. This is just going to explode across the planet where different nations want to contribute to humanity's knowledge on this. How are all of those sort of activities going to interact with each other? And so I think that Geez, you picked a very interesting point in your career. And how do we get the policies right that encourages that and accelerates it? So best of luck, and I know that you're going to contribute great things because we desperately need that.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Kat. We have a lot to learn with how the political and economic arguments are being done in the US. You've had a lot of different periods. You've evolved. Let's just think about at the initial stages of the agency formation, NASA's history, there are a lot of different drivers for the investment and therefore the outcome. What's really exciting is that Australia, we're in a really unique position. We are late to the party in the context of OECD countries having a space agency, but that's actually an advantage if we can play our cards right and pull the right policy levers. Firstly, we have an incredible alliance with the United States, arguably one of the most influential space agencies that has defined what it means to be a spacefaring species. So firstly, we have a strong alliance that's expressed in multitudes of ways, and definitely in the Space Commons, we're seeing that come about. So we have a lot to learn. Secondly, the environment in which we're in, obviously a lot of places around the world, including Australia and the US, we're just coming to terms with the sense of recovery out of a global crisis. And that provides us with an opportunity, politically speaking, in the context of policy and investment. So just like with NASA back in the day, there was an element of recovery. The world was recovering, the US was investing, and investing strategically in particular technologies and strategies. And we see them play out in space as well as DARPA, for example, the Defence Advanced Projects place as well. So Australia, we have fared really well in the context of the globe coming out of COVID. And so arguably from a policy point of view, what an incredible advantage that we may have to understand how we can invest and for those long-term benefits that do take a long time to reap those benefits. But a competitive advantage in Australia, particularly when we think about our agency and our country finding our sovereign place in space, what an amazing opportunity. So from a policy point of view, I think of that. Secondly, thinking about what are the types of levers that we can pull in policy to get the outcomes that we require. So sovereignty in space is a really important thing, which means that we need to understand how we develop technology, people, opportunities, and sectors. And so it's not just a one-size-fits-all. We need to understand how the entire pipeline virtuous circles work in the context of government, universities, and industry. So, for example, if we want a sovereign technology or a sovereign outcome, then we need to think of like, what levers are we pulling? Like, is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it, here's grants for 100% of the components, or to design and build, for example, technologies in Australia, and we'll help with that, whether that comes from the private sector or whether that comes from the industry, for example. So I think it is just a really interesting place that we're at, and we have to understand the global context as well as what makes us unique in that global, the global stage right now.
Great. Thanks, Russ and Renee. We're next going to go to a question from Arvind Ramkumar from UNSW Canberra Space. And then after that, we'll go to a question from Newton Campbell in a second. But Arvind asks, is there interest in pursuing other flight-proven Australian CubeSat/small-sat platforms for the space segment? Thank you, Arvind. Renee, Russ?
Is there room for, is that what I heard? Is there room for
is there interest in pursuing other flight-proven Australian CubeSat small-sat platforms for the space segment?
Well, I mean, of course, again, we're looking at the sovereign case here, but we're also looking at different business models as well. And I think that's where we have an advantage. I guess one of the advantages from, where we sit is that because we're deeply connected in the context of science goals, that science drives innovation, that innovation drives technology. So just to add on from the policy conversation as well, I mean, if we have to understand what those ultimate drivers are, and if we're able to define these goals, whether they're science, whether they're technology demonstrators, that's a big deal to be able to spark new technologies and to be able to spark a space sector, so to speak. So we cannot remove those drivers, I believe, from the technologies themselves. So you've got to understand by what means are we trying to achieve a new space sector, for example, and we've got to ensure that all of those elements are in there to be able to have that competitive marketplace. So it's not just good enough to, I think, have one technology in one domain. There's got to be a value that can cross over in multiple domains, definitely when we look at the opportunities here in Australia.
Yeah, I think that the advantage of the CubeSats, again, it's going to be obviously depending to what end. Like, what are you trying to achieve? What are the end goal that you're trying to achieve with the CubeSats? I think from one perspective, that sort of the CubeSat technology and the industry created around that opens the doors to organizations that don't have the funding necessarily to certainly fund a traditional launch. So being able to having a small to medium-sized enterprise, or to be able to have an academic institution actually put their science experiments, their ideas, maybe their communication technologies into space and prove that into the industrial sector is a perfect place for those sorts of technologies and CubeSats, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things definitely in developing our technology, I mean, we're looking at having the first 100% designed and completely built in Australia spacecraft. We're launching next year, quarter two, March time. And so what's really interesting with that is that it's not just that we're kind of looking at, okay, we need a technology to be able to enable the science. It's that how do we rethink the entire methodology? How do we rethink it to achieve the actual outcome that we want? And so that's led us, and of course through the heritage of the Desert Firewall Network, through the Fire Ripple and that industry engagement, we're understanding that it's not just enough to kind of imitate. You actually need to genuinely innovate. And so what's another bonus of having, for example, we have our engineers sitting side by side with Planetary researchers, and so you're starting the design differently coming into those sectors, and that's what makes it competitive in an industry point of view. We're rethinking the value you can get out of a 1U because we've completely integrated all of those subsystems basically into, effectively what's kind of like a mobile phone. I mean, these are small, but that capability is not small. In fact, they get smaller and yet their capabilities increase. And so by taking that methodology, we're able to understand, okay, so this is something that's really helpful for industry to have a fail fast, iterative technology where we're leveraging advanced manufacturing. It's a sovereign capability that we can deliver, but also what does that mean for science? And then of course, that's the conversation that opens up a whole nother pipeline. What does it mean for science when we're testing out these technologies, not only in extreme environments, doing extreme things, we're actually trying to conduct science that we cannot do with the technologies that we have right now. So again, I'd say it's understanding, it's not imitation, it's innovation.
That's great. Thank you, Renee and Russ. I'm going to unmute Newton Campbell. Newton, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi everyone. Newton Campbell. I work at NASA. I work with data science folks at NASA Langley Research Center. Been doing a lot of work around the agency in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Also a YLB member with Renae. I think it's been 2 weeks since we've been on video chat, talking about space. So I think that might be a record for us this year. But with that said, and I like where you left off with that topic, Renae. Russell, this is a little bit more in your wheelhouse, but I think it would be interesting to get an answer from both of you on this. So you guys began this discussion by talking about autonomy. And one thing that is being discussed about the Artemis mission, this is what I'm actively discussing with the IB&V folks in West Virginia, that distinguishes it from previous moon missions is the use of artificial intelligence, the much more significant use of artificial intelligence for autonomy, right? We're going beyond just normal high quality algorithms to get autonomy. Now, NASA and Australia, as well as other agencies that are going to have companies using various implementations of artificial intelligence in order to conduct Artemis missions, with a number of individual actors from each country working on different aspects of the mission. What, from your experiences in autonomy, do you see as some of the most important considerations for things like IB&V in this space? In other words, how do you develop things like assurance cases with this many different AI subsystems originating from so many different actors?
That an absolute excellent question. So, in fact, just before this, Renee, we're talking. It's like, Russ, you so got to meet Newton because your areas overlap so much. So I'm glad you asked the question.
We timed this perfectly.
Perfect.
No, it's an excellent point. Like, how do you actually ensure that the AI systems, especially because these are going to be systems of systems, right? It's going to be separate AIs with overarching AIs and monitoring AIs. So in terms of building the systems, what we found works really well is, so we work with the folks at Johnson Space Center, shared GitHub repositories. The Robonaut, yes, it's an old robot, but it's actually a very unique grasping and being able to prove that the same autonomy systems can work with Robonaut, and we can actually transport that exact same autonomy systems to other forms of robots. So they don't look anything like the Robonaut, but they actually still work in terms of pushing buttons and turning valves. And so, and some of that is philosophical breakthroughs as much as it is code breakthroughs. You know, how an object is manipulated is an intrinsic property of the object, not the robot. In terms of your assurance and how do you actually make sure that these systems of systems are actually going to work, traditionally, we've approached it like engineering, like the laws of physics mean that this metal will not bend or break, or the code reviews that Rob Ambrose has to sign off before that actually gets launched into space or something like that, where we're assured that each line of this code will actually do the end result that we want. And we have different people looking at it. Again, a very engineering approach. I think we're going to have to treat the AIs and the systems of system AIs much more like we treat people. They're not people, but we actually will design and say we'll test them. What courses did you learn, Newton, when you were doing this? How do we test you to make sure that you did know your stuff on machine learning, et cetera, et cetera? And then again, retrain and retest. So the idea, it's more like certifying a pilot. It's more what we do with the astronauts when we send them up, is we can't assure ourselves, we can't prove to anyone that when Pam was flying the space shuttle and, repairing the solar arrays when they were constructing them on the ISS, we could not prove before we sent her up that she would make every right decision regardless of the circumstances. That's just not how people work. And so the AIs are certainly not humans, but I think we're going to have to treat them and test them and assure ourselves of their performance like we do humans. That's, I guess, my short answer on that.
That's a great take on that. I haven't heard that sort of concept before. Is make sure we test it like we would an operator, right? Like we would a pilot. That's absolutely, yeah. That's a wonderful thought. And you were talking about innovation earlier, Renae. Where do you see innovation taking place, and how do you think all of these different AI are going to affect science that's happening?
Thanks, Newton. Look, I like the treat AI as people as well, because I think people are always going to be the most complex part of any system, and we cannot take the human out of the machine. We cannot take the human out of the system. And even scientists are humans first as well. So I think it's good to be able to come at it from that frame of reference. Let's pull that thread another time. This is really nice. From the context of that innovation piece and understanding how AIs can unlock, particularly from science and planetary research, I know we've spoken a little bit about the way in which those systems and those methodologies can actually unlock a lot of science outcomes, and ultimately by understanding how we can integrate those technologies with other methodologies around exploration, you will enable further exploration, which will enable further technologies, which will enable further research. We get that data and we can create new knowledge and understand a little bit more of our neighbourhood, not just in space but also here terrestrially. So I would say that if we can understand, it's not a replacement, it's never AIs are coming to steal your jobs, scientists in this case. It's actually that we can harness a lot of this innovation by coming at the problem, as you said, like coming at the problem with what are we trying to achieve. And again, I think science is one of those unique endeavors that will cross over into so many different domains, and that again, like investing in understanding what that problem space is and how you can solve that, that's where you come out looking at what innovation looks like, rather than just imitation and kind of going, well, this is a problem here, let's try and solve it this way, because you are having to do a lot of translation. Again, that's what AROSE is about, understanding how we can translate these different technologies that are designed for certain problems, but those problems could be underlying in other sectors. But again, my lens is mostly in the science space, and what we understand is that if you solve these grand problems in harsh, extreme environments, you have to innovate, and those innovations can just bring extraordinary benefits back down to Earth and society as a whole.
Yeah. I think the last thing I would add to the AI and the human, so we kind of wandered into the AI and human complementary skill sets, is I think, again, treat the AIs as team members. And so there will be some things that they're good at. The inherent strengths of an AI are incredibly complex problems. But where they are, a job you would never assign an AI, something that's like much more complicated, much more nuanced, like policy and trade-offs between scientific endeavor, cost, safety, all of those sorts of things. So I think if we kind of just treat them as team members, and then I think all of our natural philosophies and system and how we think, because we've evolved to think like that. Like we're all, I joke sometimes in the lab. It's like, well, how does it work for the organic autonomous systems?
Russ and Rene, we unfortunately only have about 8 minutes left, so let me try and get through a couple more of these quick questions quickly. First, Rocky from SciTech asks, one pretty major difference between operating in the outback and operating in deep space is signal delay. The moon is 1.3 light seconds away, but Mars is at least 5 minutes away. I'm curious how the largely real-time ops that we specialize in here in WA translate to those kinds of delays, and what your thoughts are on dealing with that.
Yeah, I can answer that, and I'll answer that very quickly. Autonomy eats lag for breakfast. we don't actually need to do each and every little motion, each little steer of the Mars rover, if we actually don't need to do that and wait for the light delay to go back and forth, if we say, Mars rover, I want you to do that, or lunar habitat, I want you to do that, and then to just receive a confirmation via maybe a picture or a video that it's been done correctly. That's how I believe we do that. And we do similar things like that here on Earth, where we have satellite communications and some time delays there as well. Great question, though.
Great question. And subsea as well. And that's Fugro's incredible innovation and strength around remote asset management. Subsea in an incredibly dynamic environment is proven around that. And that's a big basis of their remote operations command and control centre that's been awarded here in Western Australia. So definitely watch this space for more of that. I love that, eating it for breakfast. That's nice.
Well, we do have a little bit more time. Let's go to Tommy Grant, who raised his hand. Tommy, I think I'm trying to unmute you. Can you hear us, Tommy?
Oh, Tommy is a she from Washington, D.C., the Civil Service Association. Yeah, I did raise my hand. And while Russell was talking and Renee was talking, I was just so fascinated. There's like a million questions, but I know I can't get them all in. Renee mentioned the bus, and I'm visualizing me on the bus going somewhere out there. Maybe Mars, I don't know. I probably wouldn't want to do that. It'd be way too long.
Well, welcome on the bus.
And Russell talked about, in answer to Newton's question, about the AIs being so smart because we treat them like the team. They're team members, they're people. And here's my question finally, right? How smart are they? So much has been innovated, Renee, because of our interest in space, down to, I don't know, Rice Krispies. I'm just throwing that out. What can we innovate so that the astronauts are not up there without a song? What have you found among AIs? Obviously, we build them and we might think we're smarter, but they probably come up with all kinds of combinations, much like, as you pointed out, Renee, our iPhones. Sometimes I wonder, where is it getting all this from? I mean, it's like it's on a track all its own, and I just follow along. I know who my boss is right here. So tell me about machinery, innovations, AIs, put it all together for us. We have nothing to be afraid of, right?
No, sadly, AI, it really depends. They're great at some things, lousy at others. And so what they're really, really good at is, let's say, for example, reading 100,000 documents and you just asking a question and it returns that information to you. You'll probably see that they're really, really good at detecting cats on the internet, the classic sort of thing. But they are actually really, really good at solving very complicated questions for robotics. So let's say if I wanted a robot to sort of say, okay, I'll lift up that glass, you would do that super easy. Like, you wouldn't have any problems doing that. But then if you think like how much information you process, like your two cameras calculated with trigonometry, the distance from your body to that glass, and there is an infinite number of joints that you could have moved to grasp that. And then when you picked it up, you knew how, like, without smashing the glass, and you can do it, and you can do that almost with your eyes closed. I mean, that's the cutting edge of robotics right there. Like, that is the human, top of the scientists researching it, and a 3-year-old can do it. So some things smart, some things not so smart.
The complexity versus simplicity, and if you've got compounding systems, complicated comes from a lot of those compounding systems, for example, and just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's easy. So I think that's a really good, a really good point. And artificial intelligence, domain-specific artificial intelligence versus general artificial intelligence, and they're two different conversations as well.
The more narrow you make the problem, the easier they are to solve.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, unfortunately, we are about out of time. So really want to thank everybody who tuned in, but most importantly to Renee and Russ for your brilliance and your skill in showing people like myself, a failed engineer, what's happening out there, and why there is in this very difficult time that we're all going through these days such excitement in the area of space. So, and out here in WA. So once again, thank you all for joining today. Most importantly, thank you, Russ and Renee, again, and we'll see you during the next chat.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you all. Fist bump.
Hand sanitizer. Bye.